Hi folks, so this week we started a little project to do a box model car, which is a kind of an unusual way of building cars. Cars are usually built with what's called shell modeling, where you kind of take a plane and then start extruding off that plane to make the shape of the shell of the car. Um, but I found a technique for making a very handy little sort of box model car shape that you can then use to turn into a lot of different car shapes if you want to. So let's go over to Blender and start with the default cube, which is what we want. And we're going to pop into edit mode with the shift key. Sorry, again, screen cap keys. I love leaving them, having them off. So yeah, just tab into edit mode and then make sure it's all selected and then scale Y just to stretch it a little bit in Y like that, about that kind of shape. And then we want to make an edge loop here and remove the back of this cube. So I'm going to do Control R and move it till the yellow line is along this way, along that long edge, and then right click just to leave it in the middle. So there we've got a new edge loop going right down the center. And then I'm going to go to face select mode here, select this back face, hit X and delete vertices. So we're left with just a half cube. So we're going to make this cube is just going to be the start of our car, but it's very specifically going to be the wheel arch. And this is the most complicated part of the car, but we want to make a kind of a shape in edges on here that makes a sort of a kind of a half circle, a hemispherical, or sorry, half circle shape on here in edges. So to do that, we're going to subdivide this up first of all. Then we're going to get an actual cylinder and we're going to use it to give us the shape. And then we're going to drag the edges to fit around that shape. So we're going to subdivide this 4 times vertically and 3 times horizontally. So let's do Control R and get a vertical edge loop like that, and then just roll the scroll wheel until we get 4, like that. And again on this side, Control R, and again roll it and click and right click until we get 3. So now we've got 12 little evenly spaced boxes that we can use to form our wheel arch shape. So it's going to be these lines here primarily that are going to go down and around either side of the wheel arch. Um, but anyway, let's go back into object mode and give ourselves a cylinder that we can use to trace against, so to speak. So I'm going to go to Add, Mesh, Cylinder. Make sure you're back in object mode before you do this. And this cylinder has got a lot of polygons in it, and we're going for a very low polygon look. So I'm going to reduce, click on this Add Cylinder down here, and change the number of vertices down to 12, so that we can actually see the individual edges more clearly. It's going to fit with the kind of low polygon aesthetic of the car better. So then flip into edit mode for this cylinder, and now we want to rotate it over 90 degrees in Y so it's facing along the x-axis. So or Y 90, we'll flip it over and again click, and then we want to scale it along X a bit, S, X, and again click, just to make it a bit bigger so um, it's not this face of the cylinder and this face of the cube aren't right on top of each other. And then I'm just going to go into a front view here by clicking on the X on the gizmo over here, and I want to move this. Well, it's actually, first of all, I would like to rotate this cylinder because at the moment the point is down to the ground here, and similarly um, up to the top, and I would like this flat bit to be down to the ground, touching the ground. So I'm going to do or 15 to rotate 15 degrees, and that's because it's 12 sides, 15 degrees is the right amount to bring this perfectly flat down at the bottom and at the top. So now I want to do G, Z, and I'm going to bring this down. It doesn't have to be super precise, but I just want to bring it down until this corner is a little above the bottom of the cube. And that's a good spot for it to be. So now we can start to trace around that. Okay, so I'm going to go back into object mode. And it's hard to tell a little bit our cylinder and cube apart because they look very similar. So what I'm going to do is go over here to object properties for the cylinder, down to viewport properties, and change display as here from texture to wire. And now our cylinder is always going to appear as a wire frame. which is going to make it easier for us to tell it apart from the cube. So I just found that handy when I was doing it myself. So select the cube again, which is no longer very cube shaped, but anyway, it's still called cube. And we're going to go back into edit mode again. We can see our edges are there now. And we're going to go into a front view. So again, we want to pull these, what we're going to try and do is pull this line of edges around and this one around the sides of the cylinder either side. But to do that well, first of all, we're going to want to move these horizontal ones to a better position. So I'm going to make sure I'm in edge select mode, which I am, but it's this middle of the three buttons. And holding the Alt key down, I'm just going to select this loop of edges here, the top one. And I'm going to go G, Z and move it till it's just above the cylinder there. Just want to leave a bit of a gap. And then I'm going to go Alt and Shift, Alt and, sorry, not Shift, Alt and click on this line. So we just get those ones. And we're going to go G, Z, and we're going to move them up. So they're just a little bit above that corner, those corners there of the cylinder. And finally Alt and click on this line, and we're going to G, Z, and we're going to move them up. So those ones are just a little bit above those two corners. All right, so now we've got the horizontal ones in a good spot, but we want to move this one now. We want it to run down here and then out that way, and then down, and then straight down here. And this one we want to run down to here, across to here, across to here, and then straight down. So we could just grab these vertices and move them, but that would be very messy. So there's a neater way to do it. So I'm just going to go to face select mode, and I'm going to select this face and shift and click this face. So I get those two faces at the top selected. And I'm going to go back into my front view, and I'm going to go scale Y, SY, and I'm just going to scale that in until it's just a little wider than the top of the cylinder, but pretty close in size, but just a teeny bit wider. And then I'm going to go and take this bottom face here and shift and select the one above it as well, and jump back to my front view and scale Y, and this time make them bigger so that those ones again are just outside the cylinder left and right. By doing it this way, we're going to keep it perfectly even. So this is why we're using scale rather than moving them individually. And then finally, we just have one more edge. It's this one here in the, sorry, not just this, go to edge select mode. This one, this edge, we need to widen this edge to push this corner and this corner out. So select that edge, scale Y, and then just bring that out. You'll see now that this line goes perfectly down and around, and perfectly down and around. So we've got the shape that we want to make a wheel arch. So let's hide the cylinder now for the moment. We're done looking at it. So I'm just going to hit the eye icon over here in the organizer, and we're just going to hide that. And now I want to move, this is going to be the front wheel of the car. So I'm going to hit A and GY, and I just want to move everything until it's gone beyond the blue line here, which is the center line, but also the Z axis. I want to make sure everything is to the left of that axis. So that's what I've done. I've moved it. And I'm going to use a mirror modifier to make another identical one over here on the right hand side. So, but before I do that, I just want to get rid of some faces that we don't need. So I'm going to just have a look here at this end, the right hand side, go to face select mode, and I'm just going to click and shift click these four faces, and I just want to hit X and faces and just get rid of those so the end of the box is open, because I don't want the faces to be inside the car when we join the two ends together, because sometimes that gives very weird shading effects when you've got those sort of extra faces inside. Anyway, that's not a thing that's going to be a problem for us. They're gone. All right, so let's go to the modifier panel here and add a mirror modifier. Mirror. So the mirror modifier by default is in X, and that's going that side of the car, but we don't want it in X at the moment. We want one in Y. We want it over there, so that gives us the end of the car, but we can't edit this yet. We have to apply the modifier, and we can't apply the modifier where we're still in edit mode. So quickly pop out of edit mode, back into object mode, go over here to the modifier, the mirror modifier, and hit apply. And then when we return to edit mode, we'll now see that we've got editable stuff both of these bits are editable, which is what we want it to be. Now, the only thing we have to do is close the gap between the front and the back. So, one way to do that is to go edge select here, edge select mode, and then Alt click on one of those edges there, and you see it's going to collect that. Select the whole sea of edges around the end. And again, turn around so you can see the other side. And this time, Shift Alt click. So Shift meaning add to the selection. Don't clear the previous selection. So now I'm just going to go to wireframe for a second so that you can see more clearly. You can see that this sea of edges here is selected, and this sea of edges up here is selected. So because those are perfectly matching series of edges, we can just go to Edge and ask for it to bridge edge loops, and it will just fill in faces automatically between those two, which is what we want. I'm just going to go back to solid mode. So now we've got a front and back of the car with wheel arches ready to go. So it's time to add our real modifier, our real mirror modifier in, the one we do want to have, and we're going to keep this mirror modifier on. We're not going to apply it. Just make sure clipping is selected, yes, and we're looking good. So for a left and right side. Now, the next thing we want to do is that this looks a bit narrow. So this is not going to be the complete width of the car across this way, but it's going to be most of the width of the car. So I'm going to hit A to select all, and then scale X, SX, just to scale that a bit wider, about that wide. That looks good to me. And then the other thing I thought was, I thought this was a bit big, the gap up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all those top faces. Sorry, face select mode. Just select all these top faces by shift clicking on them all. And I'm going to go G, Z, and just move them down a bit. So that proportionately looks better to me. Okay, now here's the real trick. This is when it really starts to look like a car, and you'll understand why we went to so much trouble to make these shapes. Go into front select mode, and then just drag a box. Make sure you're obviously in face select mode, but just drag a box, and you should get all the faces on the side of the car selected. Now what we want to do is shift click on the 3 in each wheel arch, 6 in total, so that we unselect them. So that everything is selected but the ones inside that arch shape. And once you've got that selection right, then just hit E to extrude. And then just pull out the side of the car like that. And now you see you're left with nice wheel arch gaps. That looks pretty good. All right, so that was the tricky bit. Once you got that, beyond this, it's relatively easy. So the next major part of the car to form is I'm just going to click to clear the selection, is the top of the car, the passenger compartment. Now, it took me a while to get this right, but what I realized was the secret to making this look good is that the front of the car, the passenger compartment tends to start behind the front wheel arch, but usually finishes on top of the back wheel arch in most kind of saloons. So I'm going to shift select all of these faces. So I'm going to be on top of the wheel arch here at the back, but not at the front. But again, you can try different methods, because if you go all the way to the back, you can make kind of an estate car, so you could go further back and make a really long bonneted car. So you could start here instead, you're going to get a different look. So lots of ways, nothing's wrong here, but this is the way I'm going to do it. I like the look of this. So I'm going to go, now that I've got those selected, I'm going to get extrude and pull them up a bit, and we're going to get a very blocky looking thing. Kind of looks vaguely like a car, but not really yet. But a few little bits of shaping, and it's going to start to look much more like a real car. So the first thing obviously is that it doesn't taper. Very few cars go straight up, except for Hummers maybe, straight up the side and straight across. Yeah, kind of Hummers are a bit shaped like this. So most cars though, they taper up to the roof. So I'm going to scale what I've got selected, scale X, and that's going to bring in the sides like that. Looks good. And again, we'd like to taper it, up like this front and back. So scale Y as well. Now that's starting to look much more car-like. And I say, if you just go from the side view as well, a lot of cars, they have a different a much sharp, much, bigger angle on the front window than the back one. So while you still have these top faces selected, if you do G and Y to move in Y, you can also just slide them slightly towards the back, and that'll increase the angle of the windshield and decrease the angle of the back window, which again can looks good. I think so. I like that. So then the next thing I want to do to kind of improve the car shape is, again, just looking straight down at it from above, is it's very boxy, whereas most cars taper in a bit at the back and at the front. So let's uh, let's first of all go to the back and go to edge select mode, and I'm just going to click and shift click these four edges here at that back corner, and I'm going to go GX to move them in a little bit in X. That's all. And similarly, I'm going to select these four over here at this corner and GX and just move them in a little bit in X. And you can see now, looking down and above, that's improved the car shape quite a bit. Again, though, we have the nose of the car here is very high, very boxy at the front, so it would be nice to bring that down. Um, so in this case, I could just select those two and G, Z and move them down, but one thing I'm going to do, just because the gap here and the gap here, they're pretty much the same, but there's a big kind of a big gap here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of those, and I'm going to move them all down that way and just reduce so that these lines don't get too close together. But that you don't have to do that. That just kind of pleases me. It makes the mesh look neater in my mind. All right, so that's kind of starting to look not too bad, quite car-like. So the final thing we did was to add a couple of bumpers front and back. So to add a bumper here, what I did was I did Control R, and I added an edge loop there, and I clicked, but then I moved it slightly more towards the front of the car to about there. And then went to face select mode, and with this new edge it's given us, I selected this, this, and this, those edges there. And then I hit E to extrude and just pull out a nice bumper there at the front. And go to the back and hit Control R. There again, just bring it towards the back a bit. Face select mode. Boom, boom, and boom. Those three there. And again, extrude. Just bring it out there like that. And that gives us a bumper. All right, so now it's starting to look really car-like. But it's still a very low poly model, so we're doing good. So that's it. That's all we did this week. So next week we're going to kind of do a few more little details on the car. We're going to do the wheels, UV unwrap it hopefully, and do a bit of a paint job before it's all done and dusted. But that's all for this week. So thanks folks, and see you soon.